Chris Patterson here. Just got done with a doctor's appointment, and I kind of had a couple thoughts running through my head. So I figured, what the heck? There's really no one else on the road. It's just me. I'm a pretty amazing driver, so why not record a video? So the last couple videos I did were talking about things like, should I include sex in my books? Should I include swear words and bad language and stuff like that? And you might be thinking, okay, the next video is going to be about violence or something like that. And actually, this has been on my mind, and that is, especially today in our culture, how much diversity, or should we put diversity in our books? And I think that's a question that a lot of people don't ask, and maybe they're afraid to ask, especially, just recent events going on in our country and in the world, and obviously, how do we include diversity and all kinds of things. So these are just some of the thoughts that were going through my head, and again, if they're helpful or thought-provoking, then awesome. I did my job, I did what I wanted to do, and if it's not, then I'm sorry, you can just skip to the next video. But I know this is a very touchy, triggering topic, and so I certainly don't mean it to be. This video is not going to be from a conservative or liberal perspective. It's not going to be from any perspective other than how do I deal with diversity in my books. And I think this is very pertinent with certain types of genres like fantasy and sci-fi, which, I write fantasy. So I think the first thing that we need to recognize, and I think it's not any sort of political slant or position, to recognize that we probably live in the most diverse culture the world has ever seen. And I mean that in both the American culture, if you live in the United States, but also in terms of the global culture. We are more diverse than we have ever been. And therefore, I think it's okay to recognize and understand that a lot of literature, whether it's commercial literature or whatever, a lot of literature up until, I would say the last 100 years has been relatively non-diverse, right? If it's literature coming out of Asia, it's going to be with mostly Asian characters. If it's literature coming out of Europe, it's going to be mostly European white characters, wherever. And it's really not until, we see, and I'm going to boast a little bit, I think you see from an American literary tradition with, the Harlem Renaissance, and then, of course, you have, kind of a Latino literary revolution that happens. We start to see greater diversity in our literature, okay? And so how do we deal with this? And this video is not so much like, okay, how do I have different people in my books? It's more so like, I think one of the things when it comes to writing that we need to be really careful of, okay? And again, I don't think that this is any sort of politically charged statement, but we need to be really aware of, are we buying into, falling into, or casting a certain group of people with kind of traditional and, in many cases, inaccurate stereotypes in mind, right? Are all of your criminals a certain type of person? Are all of your, maybe you are writing a story that has gang members in it. Are they a certain type of person? Are the heroes all a certain type of person? Are the comic reliefs a certain type of person? And I think it's really, really important to be aware of that. Obviously for the reason of, just being welcoming and kind to other people, but even more so, from a financial standpoint, I don't want to shut anyone off from my books. I don't want to exclude anyone. I mean, I actually had someone, I said this in another video, I had someone tell me that using the word gypsy was racially insensitive. Now, I think that's a stretch, okay? And I said that in the other video, and I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm not changing that. But there are other cases where we may be insensitive, and we, I mean, I don't necessarily agree with this criticism. I had someone tell me that I was being very misogynistic in my books, and I think that stems from the fact that most of my main characters are men. I'm a man, and so that is a place of comfort from which I write. Now, I do think that it's a great exercise, not to deviate too much. I think it's a really cool exercise to write from different standpoints. As I'm recording this video, I'm currently writing several books that deal with a main character who is a woman. And, it's a very interesting exercise because I'm not a woman, and so I'm constantly talking to my wife and my mom and friends of mine that are women, like, how would you deal with this? This is how I wrote it. Does this make sense? Right? Because again, I want to make it sound very genuine. It's not that I want to be sensitive to women. I mean, I do, but I want it to be more so. I want it to be genuine. I want a woman to be able to pick up that book and go, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And so I think that's the first thing we need to be aware of when it comes to diversity. Are we casting people in certain roles within our books that are buying into stereotypes? And I think that's something to be aware of and be careful of. Secondly, and this is always my go-to question, are we forcing diversity in our book just because? And if the answer is yes, I don't think that's okay. I mean, look, my historical fiction books are set in the 11th century Northern Europe. Okay, the vast majority of my characters are going to be white. They're going to be Christian or Catholic, and that's just because that is what the culture was. It has nothing to do with me not wanting to give space or time to any other culture or religion or type of person. It's just the makeup of the culture. And so I'm not going to put someone of color or someone of a different religion in there just because I want to include diversity. I want to make it seem genuine. Okay. I look to a recent Netflix series called Bridgerton, which I really enjoy and I love watching with my wife. But I'm sorry, there's never been a Queen of England that was black. And as much as I enjoy the show, there's a part of that to me that just seems like, okay, did we do that just because? And it honestly it irritates me a little bit, okay? And if you disagree with me, that's absolutely okay, okay? On the other end, I think that sometimes we shy away from diversity, or we don't recognize how diverse a world is. And I guess now I'm speaking more to the fantasy authors out there. I once did a panel at a comic book convention in which I said, it's kind of crazy that if you pick up almost any fantasy book, everyone is white and everyone speaks English. And one of the things that I've been very intentional about in my books is the fact that I treat it as if it is a diverse world like the one in which we live. And people, even if they're the same skin color, if they come from different countries, different nations, different kingdoms, they're going to speak different languages. They're going to have different religions. People are going to look differently. People are going to have darker skin and lighter skin, different eye shapes, different sizes. And, and then being fantasy, then you include different races like goblins or elves or dwarves. And I've been very, very intentional with that because I recognize that a lot of fantasy books, as much as I enjoy them, seem very disingenuous. And I think a great example is a series that I absolutely love and enjoy, and they're one of my favorites, is Lord of the Rings. What a homogenous society. The people from the Rohirrim speak the same language as the people from Gondor, and that just doesn't make any sense to me. And they speak the same language as the people in Hobbiton, and so I just that's something that I've been very intentional about. So, as you go through your writing again and you address this topic of diversity, just a couple things to think about. Number one, don't do it just for the awe factor. Don't do it just to check a box. I don't think that's ever, from a literary standpoint, I don't think that's ever a good thing to do. Make the diversity genuine. Don't force it. And be very, very careful about creating or buying into stereotypes, right? And then also recognize that there are places in this world that are very homogenous. There are places in this world where people groups have segregated themselves. I live in Tucson, Arizona, and over 50% of the population is Latino. Okay, so if I wrote a book that was set in Tucson, Arizona that had no Latino characters in it, that would seem very disingenuous. And on the flip side, if I wrote a book that was set in Tucson, Arizona that had almost all Latino characters in it, that's possibly very realistic, depending on what part of Tucson the book is set. So, this is a touchy subject, and a lot of people shy away from it. But, again, just as I'm driving away from a doctor's appointment, some thoughts that popped into my head. So, like always, I hope this was thought-provoking and helpful in some way. Again, I've been driving fine, so I'm sure there's people out there that are concerned about me recording while I'm driving. We're okay, I promise. And as always, happy reading. For my fellow writers out there and authors, happy writing. And until next time, peace. When you get what you want.